The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. The reason of all this is that mercenary troops are not influenced by affection or by any other consideration except their small stipend, which is not enough to make them willing to die for you. They are ready to serve you as soldiers so long as you are at peace. But when war comes, they will either run away or march off. There is no difficulty in demonstrating the truth of this, for the present ruin of Italy can be attributed to nothing else but the fact that she has for many years depended upon mercenary armies, who for a time had some success and seemed brave enough amongst themselves. But so soon as a foreign enemy came, they showed what stuff they were made of. This was the reason why Charles VIII, King of France, was allowed to take Italy with scarcely an effort, and as it were with merely a piece of chalk. Charles VIII had merely to send a quartermaster ahead with a piece of chalk to mark the houses in which the French troops were to be quartered. Those who assert that our misfortunes were caused by our own fault speak the truth, but these faults were not such as are generally supposed to have been the cause, but those rather which I have pointed out, and as it was the princes who committed these faults, so they also suffered the penalties. I will demonstrate more fully the unhappy consequences of employing mercenary armies. Their commanders are either competent or they are not. If they are, then you cannot trust them, because their chief aim will always be their own aggrandizement, either by imposing upon you, who are their employer, or by oppressing others beyond your intentions. And if they are incompetent, then they will certainly hasten your ruin. If now you meet these remarks by saying that the same will be the case with every commander, whether of mercenary troops or others, I reply that inasmuch as armies are employed either by princes or by republics, the princes should always be in person, perform the duty of commanding his army, and a republic should send one of her own citizens to command her troops. And in case he should not be successful, then they must change him. But if he is victorious, then they must be careful to keep him within the law, so that he may not exceed his powers.
Diana says, hola.
Hi, Diana. How's it going?
Good reads.
You having a good time? How's your day? Experience has shown that princes as well as republics achieve the greatest success in war when they themselves direct the movements of their own armies, whilst mercenary troops do nothing but damage, and that a republic that has armies of her own is much less easily subjected to servitude by one of her own citizens than one that depends upon foreign troops.
He said he's melting from the heat.
Are you? Look at that. We're reading The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. That's good. You might need to cool off. Thus Rome and Sparta maintained their liberties for many centuries by having armies of their own. The Swiss are most thoroughly armed and consequently enjoy the greatest independence and liberty. The Carthaginians, on the other hand, furnish an example of the danger of employing mercenaries, for they came very near being subjugated by them at the close of the first war with Rome. Although they had appointed some of their own citizens as commanders, after the death of Epaminondas, the Thebans made Philip of Macedon commander of their army, who, after having been victorious, deprived the Thebans of their liberty. The Milanese, after the death of Duke Philip,
Hope you don't drop the book.
Employed Francesco Sforza. No, the library won't be happy with me, buddy. Against the Venetians, and having defeated them at Caravaggio, he combined with them to subjugate his employers, the Milanese. The father of Francesco Sforza, who was commander in the service of Queen Joanna of Naples, suddenly left her entirely without troops, in consequence of which she was compelled to throw herself upon the protection of the King of Aragon to save her kingdom. And if the Venetians and the Florentines formerly extended their dominions by means of mercenaries, and without their commanders attempting to make themselves princes of the country, or rather defending it loyally, I can only say that the Florentines were greatly favoured by fortune in that respect. For of the valiant captains whose ambition they might have feared, some were not victorious, some never met an enemy, and others directed their ambition elsewhere. Amongst those who were not victorious were Giovanni Augusto, John Sharp, whose good faith was never put to the test, he having been unsuccessful in the field, although it will be generally admitted that, had he been successful, the Florentines would have been at his mercy. The Sforzas and the Bracceschi were always opposed to each other, which caused Francesco to direct his ambition towards Lombardy, whilst Braccio turned his towards the Church and the Kingdom of Naples. There's always infighting, always chaos.
Yeah, he said he woke up, the pillows were wet, and no, he did not piss himself.
Oh no! What? Oh man, it must have been hot. I'm telling you, to wake you up like that. But let us come now to occurrences of more recent date. The Florentines had conferred the command of their troops upon Paulo Vitelli, a soldier of the greatest ability, who had risen from private station to the highest post and reputation. No one will deny that, if he had succeeded in taking Pisa, the Florentines would have been obliged to submit to him. Had he gone over to the enemy, they would have been helpless. If they had kept him, or have they would have been helpless, and if they kept him, they would have been obliged to submit to his terms. Yep. Oh, you gotta get a fan. You gotta get a fan, Diana. That's what you need, mate. If now we look at the Venetians, we shall find that they carried on their wars securely and gloriously, so long as they confined themselves to the proper element, the water, where they conducted their operations most bravely with their nobles and their own people. But when they engaged in wars on land, they no longer acted with their customary bravery, and adopted the habit of the other Italian states of employing mercenary troops. And although at the beginning of the growth of their dominion on land, they had no occasion to have any serious apprehensions of their commanders, because their own reputation was great and their possessions on land small, yet when they extended these, which was under the captaincy of Carmigniola, they became sensible of their error. For although they were aware that it was by his superior conduct that they had defeated the Duke of Milan, yet in observing the lukewarmness in the further conduct of the war, they concluded that they could no longer hope for victory under his command. Is it still, what is it, the Philippines? Is it spring? It'd be spring or August? I mean, autumn. Still, they dared not to dismiss him for fear of losing what they had gained, and therefore they deemed it necessary for their own security
Summer.
to put him to death. Summer, it's continuously summer.
He has 2 fans. The air itself feels hot. It's the middle of summer.
The middle of summer.
Yeah.
Crazy. That's wild. Like an L2 fans on you. The Venetians employed as generals of their forces Bartolomeo di Bergamo, Roberto da San Severino, the Count Pitigliano, and the like, with whom they had reason rather to apprehend losses than to expect successes, as indeed happened afterwards at Viola. I can't say, I'm not Italian. Where is old man Dan? Where in one battle they lost what had taken them 800 years of great labour to acquire. For with this kind of troops, acquisitions are feeble and slow, whilst losses are quick and extraordinary.
If he goes to the beach, he's probably burned to a crisp.
Oh no. Need some solid sunscreen. Yeah, it turned into like a fried prawn or something, it turned into a chip. Having thus far confined my examples to Italy, which has been for many years controlled by mercenary armies, I will now go back to an earlier period in discussing this subject, so that, having seen the origin and progress of the system, it may be more effectually corrected. You must know then that in the earlier times, so soon as the Roman Empire began to lose its power and credit in Italy, and when the Pope acquired more influence in temporal matters, Italy became subdivided into a number of states. Many of the large cities took up arms against their nobles, who, encouraged by the emperor, had kept them oppressed. The church, by way of increasing her own influence in temporal matters, favoured this revolt of the cities against their nobles. In many other cities, the supreme power was usurped by some of their own citizens, who made themselves princes of the same. Thus it was that Italy, as it were, passed under the dominion of the church in certain republics, and as these citizens and prelates were not accustomed to the management of armies, they began to hire foreigners for this purpose. The first who brought this sort of military into high repute was Alberigo da Como, a native of the Romagna. It was under his discipline that Braccio and Sforza were trained, and these in turn became the arbiters of Italy. They were succeeded by all those others who, up to our time, have led the armies of Italy, and the result of all Bella was that she was overrun by the French under Charles VIII, ravaged and plundered by Louis XII, oppressed by Ferdinand of Spain, and insulted and vituperated by the Swiss. Vituperated. The course which these mercenary leaders pursued for the purpose of giving reputation and credit to their own mounted forces was, first, to decry and destroy the reputation of the infantry of the several states. Yes.
Be right back. He's going to take a refreshing bath.
Ah, very good. It's good. Cleans the skin. Get a nice scented candle going. They did this because, having no territorial possessions of their own and being more soldiers of fortune, they could achieve no reputation.
Got it?
Yep, by means of a small body of infantry, and for a larger force they could not furnish substance. And therefore they confined themselves to cavalry, a smaller force, which enabled them the more readily to gain success and credit, and was at the same time more easily subsisted. In this way, they brought matters to that point, that in an army of 20,000 there were not over 2,000 infantry. Moreover, they used all means and ingenuity to avoid exposing themselves and their men to great fatigue and danger, and never killing each other in their encounters, being prisoners, who were afterwards liberated without ransom. They never made any night attacks when besieging a place, nor did the besieged make any night sorties. They never properly entrenched their camps, and never kept the field in winter. All these practices were permitted by their rules of war, which were devised by them expressly, as we have said, to avoid hardships and danger, so that Italy was brought to shame and slavery by the system of employing mercenary troops. Chapter 13 of Auxiliaries and of Mixed and National Troops. Auxiliary troops, which are the other kind which I have characterized in the preceding chapter as useless, are such as are furnished by a powerful ally whom the prince calls upon to come with his troops to aid and defend him, as was done quite lately by Pope Julius II, who, having had sad proof of the inefficiency of mercenaries in his attempt upon Ferrara, resorted to auxiliaries, and arranged with Ferdinand of Spain to send his armies to his assistance. Troops of this kind may be useful and good in themselves, but they are always dangerous for him who calls them to his aid. For if defeated, he remains undone, and if victorious, then he is in their power like a prisoner. And although I could adduce numerous examples of this from ancient history, yet I will here cite that of Pope Julius II, which is still fresh in our minds, and whose conduct in that respect could not well have been more important than what it was. For, wishing to take Ferrara, he placed himself entirely in the hands of a foreigner. Fortunately for him, however, an incident occurred which saved him from the full effect of his bad selections. For his auxiliaries, having been defeated at Ravenna, the Swiss suddenly appeared on the field and put the victors to ignominious flight. And thus Julius II escaped becoming prisoner either to his enemies who had fled or to his auxiliaries, for the enemy's defeat was not due to their assistance but to that of others. There you go, you can just never rely on them. The Florentines, having no army of their own, and wishing to get possession of Pisa, employed for that purpose 10,000 French troops, and were involved in greater danger by them than they had ever experienced from any other difficulty. The Emperor of Constantinople, by way of resisting the attacks of his neighbours, put 10,000 troops into Greece, who, at the termination of the war, refused to leave the country again. And this was the beginning of the subjection of Greece to the infidels. Whoever then desires not to be victorious, let him employ auxiliary troops, for they are much more dangerous even than mercenaries. For your ruin is certain with auxiliaries, who are all united in their obedience to another, whilst mercenaries, even after victory, need more time and greater opportunity to injure you. For they are not one homogeneous body, and have been selected by yourself and are in your pay, and their commander being appointed by you. He cannot so quickly gain sufficient influence over these troops to enable him to injure you. In short, with mercenaries, the danger lies in their cowardice and bad faith, whilst with auxiliaries, their valour constitutes the danger. A wise prince, therefore, should ever avoid employing either one of them, and should rely exclusively upon his own troops, and should prefer defeat with them rather than victory with the troops of others, with whom no real victory can ever be won. In proof of this, I shall not hesitate again to cite the conduct of Caesar Borgia. This duke entered the Romagna with auxiliaries, taking there only French troops, with whom he took Imola and Forli. But thinking afterwards that these troops were not reliable, he had recourse to mercenaries, whom he deemed less dangerous, and engaged the Orsini and the Vitelli. These, however, proved themselves by their conduct to be uncertain, faithless and dangerous, and therefore the Duke destroyed them, and then relied upon his own troops exclusively. The difference between the one and the other of these troops is easily seen when we look at the reputation of the Duke Valentino at the time when he employed the Orsini and the Vitelli, and when he had but none of his own troops, for then his credit increased steadily. He had none but his own troops, for then his credit increased steadily, and the Duke was never more highly esteemed than when everyone saw that he was thoroughly master of his armies. You need to be in command of your own armies. I did not intend to depart from Italian in recent instances, and yet I cannot leave unnoticed the case of Hiero of Syracuse, being one of those to whom I have referred before. Having been made general of the Syracusan army, as before stated, he quickly perceived that mercenary troops were not useful, their commanders being appointed in a similar manner as our Italian condottieri, and as it seemed to Hiero that he could neither keep nor dismiss them with safety, he had them all put to death and cut to pieces, and thenceforth carried on the war exclusively with troops of his own. Smart man, you realize. I will also recall to memory an illustration from the Old Testament applicable to this subject. David, having offered to go and fight the Philistine bully Goliath, Saul, by way of encouraging David, gave him his own arms and armor, which David, however, declined, after having tried them, saying that he could not make the most of his strength if he used those arms, and therefore he preferred to meet the enemy with no other arms but his sling and his knife. In short, the armor of another never suits you entirely. It is either too large and falls off your back, or weighs you down where it is too tight. You must use what is your own. Charles VII, father of Louis XI, King of France, having by his valour and good fortune delivered France from the English, recognised the necessity of depending solely upon his own armies, and organised in his kingdom regular companies of artillery, cavalry, and infantry. His son, Louis XI, afterwards disbanded the infantry, and began to hire Swiss soldiers in their stead. This error, being followed by others, is now seen to have been the cause of the dangers to which that kingdom was exposed. For by giving prominence to the Swiss, Louis depreciated his own troops, and having disbanded his own infantry entirely, and accustomed his mounted forces to the support of the Swiss, they felt that they could have no success without them. Thence it came that the French could not hold their own against the Swiss, and without their support they could not stand against others. And thus the French armies have remained mixed, that is to say, partly their own troops and partly mercenaries, which, although better than either auxiliaries or mercenaries alone, yet makes them much worse than if they were composed exclusively of their own troops. Let this example suffice, for the kingdom of France would have been invincible if the military system established by Charles VII had been preserved in and extended. But the short-sightedness of men leads them to adopt any measure that for the moment seems good, and which does not openly reveal the poison concealed under it, as I have said above of hectic fevers. A prince, then, who does not promptly recognise evils as they arise, cannot be called wise, but unfortunately this faculty is given to but few. And if we reflect upon the beginning of the ruin of the Roman Empire, it will be found to have resulted slowly from hiring the Goths for its armies. For that was the first cause of the enervation of the forces of the empire, and the valour of which the Romans divested themselves was thus transferred to the Goths. I conclude then that no prince can ever be secure that has not an army of his own, and he will become wholly dependent upon fortune if in times of adversity he lacks the valour to defend himself. And wise men have ever held the opinion that nothing is more weak and unstable than the reputation of power when not founded upon forces of the prince's own, by which I mean armies composed of his own subjects or citizens, or of his own creation. All others are either mercenaries or auxiliaries. The means for organising such armies of his own will readily be founded by the prince by studying the method in which Philip of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, and many republics and princes organised their armies, to which I refer in all respects. Quick water break.
Maybe you streamed a bit early today.
It doesn't matter. There's no wrong time to stream. No such thing. It's a mystery when it'll occur. Out of surprise. Chapter 14 of the duty of a prince in relation to military matters. A prince, then, should have no other thought or object so much at heart, and make no other things so much his especial study, as the art of war and the organisation and discipline of his army. For that is the only art that is expected of him who commands, and such is its power that it not only maintains in their position those who were born princes, but it often enables men born in private station to achieve the rank of princes. And on the other hand, we have seen that princes who thought more of indulgence and pleasure than of arms have thereby lost their states. Thus, the neglect of the art of war is the principal cause of the loss of your state, whilst the proficiency in it often enables you to acquire one. Francesco Sforza, from being skilled in arms, rose from private station to be Duke of Milan, and his descendants, by shunning the labours and fatigue of arms, relapsed into the condition of private citizens. Amongst the other causes of evil that will befall a prince who is destitute of a proper military force is, that it will make him contemn that which is one of those disgraces against which a prince ought especially to guard, as we shall demonstrate further on. For there is no sort of proportion between one who is well armed and one who is not so. Nor is it reasonable that he who is armed should voluntarily obey the unarmed. Fair enough. Or that a prince who is without a military force should remain secure amongst his armed subjects. That's like America. But when there is disdain on the one side and mistrust on the other, it is impossible that the two should work well together. A prince, then, who is not master of the art of war, besides other misfortunes, cannot be respected by his soldiers, nor can he depend upon them. And therefore, should the practice of arms ever be uppermost in the prince's thoughts, he should study it in time of peace as much as in actual war, which he can do in two ways, the one by practical exercise, and the other by scientific study. As regards the former, he must not only keep his troops well disciplined in exercise, but he must also frequently follow the chase, whereby his body will become injured to hardships, and he will become familiar with the character of the country, and learn where the mountains rise and the valleys debouch, and how the plains lie. He will learn to know the nature of rivers and of the swamps, to all of which he should give the greatest attention. For this knowledge is valuable in many ways to the prince, who can thereby learn to know his own country, and can therefore better understand its defence. Again, by the knowledge of and practical acquaintance with one country, he will with greater facility comprehend the character of others, which it may be necessary for him to understand. For instance, the mountains, valleys, plains, rivers, and swamps of Tuscany bear a certain resemblance to those of other provinces, so that by the knowledge of the character and formation of one country, he will readily arrive at that of others. A prince who is wanting in that experience lacks the very first essentials which a commander should possess, for that knowledge teaches him where to find the enemy, to select proper places for entrenchments, to conduct armies, regulate marches and order battles, and to keep the field with advantage. Amongst other praises that have been accorded by different writers to Philopoemen, prince of the Achaeans, was that in time of peace he devoted himself constantly to the study of the art of war. And when he walked in the country with friends, he often stopped and argued with them. Thus, suppose the enemy were on yonder mountain, and we should happen to be here with our army. Which of the two would have the advantage? How could we go most safely to find the enemy, observing proper order? If we should wish to retreat, how should we proceed? And if the enemy were to retreat, which way would we best pursue him? And thus in walking he proposed to his friends all the cases that possibly could occur with an army, hearing their opinions and giving his own, and corroborating with them with reasons, so that by these continued discussions no case could ever arise in the conduct of an army for which he had not thought of the proper remedy. As regards the exercise of the mind, the prince should read history, and therein study the actions of eminent men, observe how they bore themselves in war, and examine the causes of their victories and defeats, so that he may imitate the former and avoid the latter. But above all, should he follow the example of whatever distinguished man he may have chosen for his model, assuming that someone has been specially praised and held up to him as glorious, whose actions and exploits he should ever bear in mind. Thus it is told of Alexander that he imitated Achilles, and of Caesar that he had taken Alexander for his model, as Scipio had done with Sirius. And whoever reads the life of Cyrus, written by Xenophon, will not fail to recognize afterwards in the life of Scipio of how much value this imitation was to him, and how closely the latter conformed in point of temperance, affability, humanity, and liberality to the accounts given of Cyrus by Xenophon. A wise prince, then, should act in like manner, and should never be idle in times of peace, but should industriously lay up stores to which to avail himself in times of adversity, so that when fortune abandons him, he may be prepared to resist her blows. Chapter 15. So it means always be prepared, always be ready. Study wise men. practice their ways. Chapter 15. Of the means by which men, and especially princes, win applause to incur censure, or incur censure. I need to be Italian to read this properly. It remains now to be seen in what manner a prince should conduct himself towards his subjects and his allies. And knowing that this matter has already been treated by many others, I apprehend that my writing upon it also may be deemed presumptuous, especially as in the discussion of the same I shall differ from the rules laid down by others. But as my aim is to write something that may be useful to him for whom it is intended, it seems to me proper to pursue the real truth of the matter, rather than to indulge in mere speculation on the same. For many have imagined republics and principalities, such as have never been known to exist in reality. For the manner in which men live is so different from the way in which they ought to live, that he who leaves the common course for that which he ought to follow will find that it leads him to ruin rather than to safety. For a man who, in all respects, will carry out only his professions of good, will be apt to be ruined amongst so many who are evil. A prince, therefore, who desires to maintain himself, must learn to be not always good, but to be so or not as necessity may require. Leaving aside, then, the imaginary things concerning princes, and confining ourselves only to the realities, I say that all men, when they have spoken of, and more especially princes, from being in a more conspicuous position, are noted for some quality that brings them either praise or censure. Thus one is deemed liberal. Thus one is deemed liberal, another misero, to use the Tuscan expression. For avaricious is he who by rapine desires to gain, and miserly we call him who abstains too much from the enjoyment of his own. One man is esteemed generous, another rapacious, one cruel, another merciful, one faithless, another faithful, one effeminate and pusillanimous, another ferocious and brave, one affable, another haughty, one lascivious, another chaste, one sincere, the other cunning, one facile, another inflexible, one grave, another frivolous, one religious, another skeptical, and so on. I am well aware that it would be most praiseworthy for a prince to possess all of the above-named qualities that are esteemed good, but as he cannot have them all, nor entirely observe them, because of his human nature which does not permit it, he should at least be prudent enough to know how to avoid the infamy of those vices that would rob him of his state, and if possible also to guard against such as are likely to endanger it. But if that be not possible, then he may be, with less hesitation, follow his natural inclinations, nor need he care about incurring censure for such vices, without which the preservation of his state may be difficult. For all things considered, it will be found that some things that seem like virtue will lead you to ruin if you follow them, whilst others that apparently are vices will, if followed, result in your safety and well-being. Chapter 16. Of liberality and parsimoniousness. To begin with the first of the above-named qualities, I say that it is well for a prince to be deemed liberal, and yet liberality, indulged in so that you will no longer be feared, will prove injurious. For liberality worthily exercised, it should be, will not be recognized, and may bring upon you the reproach of the very opposite. For if you desire the reputation of being liberal, you must not stop at any degree of sumptuousness, so that a prince will in this way generally consume his entire substance, and may in the end, if he wishes to keep up his reputation for liberality, be obliged to subject his people to extraordinary burdens, and resort to taxation, and employ all sorts of measures that will enable him to procure money. This will soon make him odious with his people, and when he becomes poor, he will be contemned by everybody, so that having by his prodigality injured many and benefited few, he will by the first to suffer every inconvenience and be exposed to every danger. And when he becomes conscious of this and attempts to retrench, he will at once expose himself to the imputation of being a miser. A prince, then, being unable, without injury to himself, to practice the virtue of liberality in such manner that it may be generally recognized, should not, when he becomes aware of this and is prudent, mind incurring the charge of parsimoniousness. For after a while, when it is seen by his prudence and economy, he makes his revenues suffice him, and that he is able to provide for his defense in case of war, and engage in enterprises without burdening his people, he will be considered liberal enough by all those whom he takes nothing. And these are the many, whilst only those whom he does not give and which of the few will look upon him as parsimonious? I don't know what half these things mean. Study this well. In our own times, we have not seen any great things accomplished, except by those who were regarded as parsimonious. All others have been ruined. Pope Julius II, having been helped by his reputation of liberality to attain the pontificate, did not afterwards care to keep up that reputation to enable him to engage in war against the King of France, and he carried on ever so many wars without levying any extraordinary taxes. Very good. So you should be parsimonious. Have parsimoniousness. Yep. And use your own troops. Don't use mercenaries and that of others. Or you'll be ruined. Follow wise men. These are the main things I got from that. Take care, everyone. Hope you enjoy the reading. Stay magnificent.